I just want to give a brief content warning before I start this episode. I'm going to discuss being outed as a gay person. I know I don't usually get very specific with content warnings, but I feel like this kind of topic and the fact that it comes up so much in the film that I'm going to discuss could be upsetting for people. So I'm going to give you a heads up. If being outed is not something that you feel like you can hear about right now, I won't blame you if you skip this episode. Hello, my name is Amber, and this is You Look Like a Badger, a monthly podcast where I discuss queer cinema. It is officially December, where I discuss queer holiday movies under the title Happy Holidays, and the film that we're going to be discussing in this episode is Happiest Season.
Come with me. Where? To my parents' house for Christmas.
Oh, really?
I want to wake up with you on Christmas morning. And if that doesn't convince you to love Christmas, I'll never bring it up again.
Happiest Season is a 2020 romantic comedy, directed by lesbian icon Clea Duvall. Set at Christmas, Abby is spontaneously invited to spend the holidays with her girlfriend Harper's family, and she is ecstatic. There's only one catch. Harper isn't out to her family like she told Abby she was. In fact, she has no plans on telling them at all. What we have is an incredibly uncomfortable but familiar 1 hour and 42 minutes of Abby trying to pretend she's not hurt by Harper's actions, and Harper reverting to her former, more socially acceptable self around her parents. This divided queer audiences quite a bit, with the promise of a fun lesbian Christmas movie being very bluntly shattered with the realization that Christmas has rarely been a good time for queer people. In terms of awards, this film won the 2021 GLAAD Media Award for Outstanding Film Wide Release, and it received special recognition for its soundtrack. It currently has an 82% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes and a 73% audience score, and a 3.1 on Letterboxd. Sometimes the scores don't reflect the discourse that went on, but this is like a fairly recent release, and I was there on Twitter, on Tumblr when the discourse occurred, so don't be fooled by that Rotten Tomatoes score. There were plenty of people who were very unhappy with how this film came to be, and this is the last episode of this season where I get to discuss controversial films, and this one is a doozy. Mainly because, for me personally, when I watched it for the first time, around the time that it came out, it made me cry really hard, which is why I wavered on calling it a romantic comedy, even though that's, the genre that it falls into, because there's so much about this film that's just very upsetting. And I'm gonna get into why that came to be. I have different opinions about it now. I think I'm more generous towards it. I still wouldn't say that I like the film, but there's just something off about it. There's so much about it that doesn't feel like it fully works. And the fact that I had such an upsetting reaction to it the first time I watched it probably says something about the state of cinema for lesbians and, queer women in general. I'm going to try and read some of the reviews on Letterboxd, but I just want to point out first that I had to skip over a lot of them because so many of them were just about how much people loved Aubrey Plaza. That was like a consistent theme amongst the reviews. So I've kind of condensed them down to this one review as one of the most popular ones by Muriel, who says, "I'm a simple person, I see gay Aubrey Plaza and I'm happy." That was kind of the rhetoric that kept being repeated, and I didn't want to have to keep doing the same review over and over again. I've got another review by Jill B. Santos, who says, "This is truly the worst lesbian movie I've watched in my entire life, and it couldn't have been any worse than that. As a lesbian dying for at least one good light-hearted lesbian movie, I couldn't be more upset after watching this movie." There was a major criticism, which I can't reveal here because it spoils the movie, but The other major criticism I'd say is that the trailer kind of promised something quite light and fun, and then we were all just kind of dragged down to the depths of crushing reality that lesbians aren't allowed to have fun. Lesbians aren't allowed those things. I think my perspective on this is that I've watched more films about lesbians and bisexual women. They've been like comedies, you know, like Go Fish or The Incredibly True Adventures of Two Girls in Love, or, you know, like The Watermelon Woman, which I'd done on this podcast before. Stuff that's like, it deals with queerness and it deals with semi-heavy stuff, but it manages to be funny and interesting in a way that doesn't make you want to throw yourself into a ravine. Unfortunately, this film doesn't do that. I think the trailer didn't help because it really did make it seem like it was going to be like a fun, you know, light movie where, oh, there's some hijinks at Christmas, but then you get into it and it's about an unhealthy relationship where one person is being put into an environment where they're having to pretend for the sake of their girlfriend that they're not gay, and then you have this other character who's so deep in the closet that she is actively harming the person that she's in a relationship with. And, you know, it could have been like a dark comedy, maybe, in the right hands, but it doesn't ever manage to get there in the way that, say, a Christmas movie would for a straight audience. I tell you what, this film kind of reminded me of a film called The Family Stone, which is one of the most grating films I've probably ever seen, and it's also set at Christmas. Now, in that film, it's kind of a similar situation where this woman has been invited to stay with this family, and they're just the fucking worst to her the whole time for no real reason that's established. They just hate her, and they actively support their son slash her fiance to start just like dating her sister because they prefer her. It's a truly awful movie, and I do hate it, and I would argue that it gave me like a similar visceral reaction of like the horror that can come with just being around terribly unpleasant people at a time where you can't escape. So like a holiday, Christmas being a good example. Inadvertently, this film very much established that Christmas just isn't for gay people. And honestly, if it stuck to his guns, maybe that could have been an interesting idea. Like, not to spoil anything, but if the film had ended on a note of, we don't actually need all this, like, we can just do our own thing, I feel like it would have rubbed people a lot less the wrong way. Unfortunately, that's not where the film went, and it tried to have its cake and eat it too, and ended up just being unpleasant and unbalanced and not fun, just incredibly stressful. Encapsulated by this next review by Molly Leach, which says, like, Get Out, but it sucks. Truly, I don't understand the desire to make a film like this, really. Well, I do, actually, because I've read interviews with Clea Duvall where she explains why she kind of went this route. I just, you know, it would have been more interesting if it had been taken some other directions, which I will get into as we get past the spoilers section, which I'm going to warn you about now. So from this point on, I do plan on discussing the film in detail. If you haven't seen it and you are eager to see it, then this is your spoiler warning. Go and watch the film and then come back and finish this episode. Make sure you watch it before, you know, Christmas. Like, don't leave this episode on pause on like the 23rd of December and then you wait until like New Year's Eve to watch Happiest season. That'd be really a weird thing to do. If you want, you can listen to the rest of this episode on Christmas Day. I'd be thrilled about that. It's your decision. Whatever you decide to do, just know that I'm not responsible for spoiling this film because I warned you about it.
Abby, what are you doing in the closet?
Well, I guess I must have been sleepwalking.
Oh, that is very dangerous. I once took too many Ambien and I bought a racehorse online.
I have come to understand why Clea Duvall decided to go the direction she did. So she did an interview with Rolling Stone where she said the following. I don't have a traditional family, so I've spent the majority of my Christmases with other people's families. And what it feels like to always be on the outside of a family is so specific. That's what I think of a lot when I think about the holidays. I think it's a very relatable thing for queer people. At one time or another, we've all done this. This idea of being an outsider in a group is interesting. It's not like an uncommon thing. I don't know why, right? But the first thing that I thought of was Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Is Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer a queer text? I'm saying yes. This idea of being different but being made to push up against tradition, and there's nothing really more traditional than the nuclear family. And in this case, the nuclear family is fucking loaded and actively running to be part of the government, who are like pushing traditional values in air quotes, which just means homophobia, misogyny, and all that shit. Okay, so at the beginning of the film, Abby is in a space where she's kind of anti-Christmas, or at the very least, she's not big into it because she doesn't have that kind of family. It's mentioned numerous times throughout that her parents are dead, so she doesn't really celebrate in a traditional sense. This is probably on top of the fact that she's also a lesbian. And you have Harper, who in the beginning of the film, they're going on like a Christmas tour, and she's like very excited about Christmas, and in the spur of the moment invites her girlfriend to come and stay with her family over Christmas. It's setting up like an opposites attract in the vein of the romantic comedy, but we're not seeing a couple get together, we're seeing a couple test their relationship by spending time with their family. Another film it kind of reminded me of was Four Christmases. It's a film with Reese Witherspoon and Vince Vaughn, where they spend 4 separate Christmases with all 4 of their parents who are all like divorced, so they have to spend all the different Christmases with their parents, and this kind of tests the bounds of their relationship. Secrets are outed, we're all mean to each other, but everything's happy in the end. It's weird that how many connections I'm making on the spot. I just managed to connect it to so many bad films that I've seen that have had a Christmas theme, and they all have kind of a similar idea that they don't interrogate, which is assimilation is key to Christmas, and assimilation is the only way to keep the peace, so we must continue on with it, right? Now, this film goes out of its way to show the angst and strife that Abby is experiencing, but ends up not really validating that experience by having Harper and Abby end up together in the end. So many people hate the ending of this film. I'm also one of those people, but I have very different feelings towards Harper. I'm going to get to that. I have a whole section dedicated to it. Being pro and anti-Christmas in the beginning is analogous to the extent that these two characters are able to assimilate into the traditional family structure, and more importantly, heteronormativity. Harper has done the dance of heterosexuality. She's been doing it for her whole life, right? To an extent, I think Abby really is her only gay support group. It doesn't really seem like Harper is used to being around gay people. That's the kind of vibe that I got. For like all of her queer angst, all of that kind of goes to Abby, if you know what I mean. Whereas Abby very much seems like she's more comfortable in herself and she knows other queer people. And, you know, a lot of that has to do with the fact that she hasn't ever had to come out to her parents, which is, you know, it's not to say that she's never had to come out ever, because family is like at the center of this film. We see these two people interact with it very differently because Harper is very acutely aware of the consequences because she knows her family, probably more than anyone. She knows what she must do to not rock the boat, because Christmas kind of becomes, in the case of the film, an extended metaphor for heterosexuality. We can't break tradition and we can't rock the boat because that will ruin the fun that everyone else is having. And Harper knows this, whereas Abby is, at least within the context of the film, somewhat less aware. These aren't particularly like fleshed out characters, so I don't know the strife that Abby has gone through in her life other than she has dead parents. We don't know that much about what her experience of queerness is. I'd say that is like a major flaw of the film. These aren't particularly deep characters, so we are made to like side with Abby as a default because she's the one having to stretch herself into a role that she's just not used to. Harper is very clearly used to it. Abby is not. Harper is a slightly more difficult character to understand and empathize with. Unfortunately, that seems to be by design. But, you know, I'm a contrarian and I like to have opinions that annoy people. So Harper's relationship with Sloane and her mother, I think we kind of understand why Harper is doing what she's doing. Unfortunately, we're not guided to understand her. We're not encouraged to see her deep emotional angst. And despite the fact that Abby doesn't have depth, really, we are made to identify with her more because the slight against her is more obvious to us. So when we see stuff like one of the first things Harper's mum does is criticize the way that she looks. She like makes a comment about how she's not wearing makeup. I was personally very triggered, but there's this pressure on Harper to be like this perfect emblem of their family. She kind of slips right in there. Unfortunately, Abby is just kind of pushed off to the side. They call her Harper's orphan friend, and they do this the whole time that she's there. Can you believe that this film is set only over 5 days? It feels 14 years long. The agony of being around these people just makes this film feel endless, and I'm not joking about that. The immediate assertion of heterosexuality is insane because what her mum does is first tells Harper that her high school boyfriend is single and then invites him to dinner. So already, right, we have this idea of Harper doesn't have a boyfriend. We need to change that because it's Christmas. She should have a boyfriend. So I'm going to sort that because that's what your mum does. There's all this pressure of what Christmas is supposed to look like. And initially, Abby and Harper seem like they're going to be like a united front against it. But the like triggering event is Abby gets accused of shoplifting and she's disinvited from their family dinner. So Abby kind of seeks outside input, and it's not really surprising that she seeks two queer people. Her friend, whose name I'm forgetting, oh God, I'm sorry. Played by Dan Levy and also by Aubrey Plaza's character Riley, right? So it's not until Abby gets this outside input and kind of witnesses how easy it is for Harper to snap back into her role as the perfect daughter that these kind of cracks in their relationship start to show themselves, and stuff that she's maybe been ignoring comes to the front. And this idea of the perfect Christmas for a straight person is going to look quite different for a queer person. And this very much hinges on the way that the family unit reacts to queerness and heterosexuality. In this case, it's stuff like Abby being excluded from the family picture because, you know, she's not family. Or, you know, the dad, whose name I can't remember either, who's running for councilman, and he's running on a platform of tradition, family, and faith. All massive keywords that if you're a queer person, you're fully aware just mean not gay. We don't want gay here. Much of this film does kind of seek to interrogate the solid foundation, allegedly, that family is built on, and the fact that the three sisters at the end kind of absolutely destroy the Christmas party at the end by fighting with one another could be considered a good thing. And honestly, if the film kind of ended with them like fucking up the party, Abby and her friend just leaving and then just like never talking to each other, and then like meeting up in a couple of years being like, hey, sorry that I did that to you. That was really fucked up. I was going through a really hard time actually, and I didn't mean to invite you to my parents' house and not tell you that stuff. And then Abby being like, that's okay. You know what? you're going through a hard time. I'm glad that we're not together, actually, because I don't think we were very healthy, but I wish you well, and bye-bye, and never see you again. If that was how the film ended, I think you'd have a much stronger argument that the film was about questioning whether Christmas was for queer people and the extent that queer people are welcomed into the traditional unit of the family. Because for most of the film, it's arguing that it's not. So the ending very much feels like it's undercutting the kind of correct action of the three sisters just fucking everything up and being like, this is a sham. Like, we're all lying and none of this is real. And you're a massive bigot, and I don't want to I don't want to act like this anymore. It's kind of undercut by Abby and Harper getting back together and everyone being suddenly okay with queer people. Having your cake and eating it doesn't work a lot of the time, especially if you want to make something interesting. And, you know, there were parts of this film that were funny. The absolute gut-wrenching outing scene and just like general fear surrounding the film. You could have turn this into like a decent dark comedy, but when you're trying to remain like light and fluffy whilst also stabbing your audience in the neck and watching them bleed out with sadness, you can't do both. Like, it doesn't work. You're either making a film about the assimilation that is necessary for the family unit to function, or you're not.
Growing up, we were totally inseparable. We were best friends, and then freshman year we became more than friends. We started dating, but nobody knew that, obviously. And we would like leave these little love letters in each other's lockers. And one day one of Harper's friends found one of the letters and she asked Harper what it was about, and Harper basically just said that I am gay and that I wouldn't leave her alone. And then within a couple days, like, everybody in school found out and everybody was so awful to me.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, so the thing that I can relate to is just being in love with somebody that is too afraid to show the world who they are.
On occasion, I will get frustrated with audiences that expect a film to turn to them and be like, don't worry, kids, the stuff that the people did in this movie, it isn't actually okay. The reason I get annoyed at that stuff is because I want to watch stuff that trusts me to interpret the information it's giving me. I don't enjoy being led somewhere too directly because it's just not fun. It's also not that interesting. There is something to having a film of two people in a very toxic relationship end up together at the end. There is something like interesting to it, just being like, either they don't know that it's an unhealthy relationship or they don't care, you know, they just wanted these characters to end up together. It's kind of funny. In terms of the actual film, it doesn't feel as though the filmmakers understood the kind of relationship they were representing, and I mean that in like several ways, which I will get into. Along with assimilation and family, I think a lot of this film is about the disillusionment of the inherently healthy relationship between women, right? I think there's this idea that women in relationships with each other, they don't have the same pitfalls as heterosexual relationships do. There's just like less infighting, there's less hierarchy, there's less toxicity, there's less abuse. It's a perceived idea that, honestly, in terms of like mainstream films, I don't know that there are that many that actually portray manipulative behavior like this. I think there's stuff like that's like over sexualized or like hyperbolic. So I'm thinking like Black Swan, Mulholland Drive, stuff like that. There are a few that are like incisive about it. Bar the ending, I actually think this is like a decent depiction of a toxic relationship where the person being like manipulated and pushed around has like a very slow realization of this behavior. There are decent elements here of like disillusionment. I do think this could have made an okay dark comedy about a woman realizing that her girlfriend isn't particularly emotionally mature and isn't actually ready for a serious relationship, and the way that she realizes this is by going home with her family and realizing that they're quite regressive and homophobic and she isn't actually out to them. If it stuck to its guns, I think it could have been interesting. It wanted to be light and breezy. So the tone with the actual events that are happening, they're dissonant to one another. It just makes for a really upsetting, like viscerally upsetting experience because you're not laughing really, even though there are elements of, oh yes, that's a romantic comedy trope. I can sense that this is meant to be a joke. I'm not laughing, I am just kind of clutching my face in horror at the events of the film. But I think there are decent elements of the ways that tradition are not for queer people necessarily, but also that there is no such thing as a perfect relationship. This is like regardless of gender. And I think the romantic comedy is kind of a perfect place to explore that. The realization that this utopian idea of women loving women isn't bulletproof, and using Christmas as a backdrop is an interesting thing to do. Abby plans to propose to Harper on Christmas. Now, if this were any other movie, that would be huge cliche. We'd be like, okay, yeah, I know where this is going. So she plans to propose on Christmas, and she's going to ask Harper's dad for, like, permission. By all accounts, she's attempting to do something traditional for once, because she's not a Christmas person. She hasn't really done a Christmas before, so she's going to do the Christmas, and she's going to do the romantic comedy trope. And then the whole film is evidence that this idea of proposing on Christmas, this cliche thing, is a terrible idea. Is this film secretly a massive satire on romantic comedies and also Christmas movies? Because the disgust and horror and queasy feeling that I feel when I watch the film is genuinely hard to capture, actually. And the fact that the film managed to do it, and seemingly unintentionally, is kind of impressive. You're watching a woman fall out of love with her girlfriend and you can't do anything to stop it, right? She's just like trapped in this house and she's becoming like increasingly aware that she doesn't love the version of her girlfriend that is on display for her parents. And she very much realizes that this is her. She's with someone who isn't mature enough or isn't able to be the person that she said that she would be. That's uncomfortable and weird and kind of interesting. And if the film had ended when Abby walked out the door, this could have been like a genuinely fascinating experience. Like the kind of tension of just, what am I doing with this person? And the kind of, it's a romantic comedy about falling out of love with someone. You even have Riley, right? Riley turns up as Harper's ex, as like Abby's ghost of Christmas yet to come, being like, yeah, I've been there. Get out now, Jesus Christ. So, like I said, I read interviews with Duvall, and I'm going to quote one from one she did with Glamour magazine, where she said, there are so many lesbian movies that end in tragedy, or these people fall madly in love and then never see each other again. We don't get a lot of happy endings, and I wanted them to make it. I get it, of course I get it, but like, it doesn't work here. Clea Duvall has another feature film called The Intervention, which I also didn't like because it was just about a bunch of couples arguing, and that was the whole film, and they all should have broken up and they didn't. And I got the exact same vibes from this film. I don't think Clea Duvall likes endings. She wants romantic love to work. Not breaking up this couple, despite the fact that they might as well be from two different planets. And they're terrible at communicating. Abby is fully convinced that they're going to be engaged by the end of this Christmas. And Harper has not even told her parents that she's gay, never mind that she has a girlfriend. They're on separate fucking planets. I don't even know how long have they been dating? Is it like a year? I think it's like a year. That's not enough time. I do think that you really need to know each other. And is this cliche of lesbians moving like very quickly in relationships. Even so, you have to recognize when you're just like rushing things simply because you don't want to be alone. And I think in a way there's like a meta element to that. You cannot just like rush into something to like slap a happy ending on something, because it does not work here. The toxic relationship itself is genuinely interesting, and I think if more time had been invested in creating these characters, creating like their inner world where we understood where they were coming from and why they were acting the way they were, could have been a genuinely interesting exploration of like the divisions between out people and closeted people, and what it means to like be in a relationship with someone who is unwilling to like face the reality of the world. And instead we get this.
Abby, hey, can we just talk for a second?
No, I gotta go. I can't do this for you anymore. But Merry Christmas. Enjoy your family and enjoy Connor.
What? No, I don't want him. I don't want Connor. I want you.
Then what was that?
I don't know. Why are you huddled in a corner with Riley?
None of this has anything to do with Riley. This is all happening because of you, Harper. You not telling your parents about us is a choice that you made.
It is not that simple.
Do you know how painful it's been to watch the person that I love choose to hide me?
I am not hiding you. I am hiding me. Okay? Our entire life, we have been expected to be these perfect golden children. I mean, love in our house wasn't something we just got for free. It is something that we competed for, and if we veered off their course, we lost it. I know it's messed up, okay? I get it. But they're my parents. And I am scared that if I tell them who I really am, I will lose them. And I know if I don't tell them, I will lose you. I don't want to lose you.
I'm going to offer a potentially unpopular opinion, which is that we should have been allowed to empathize with Harper. What I mean by that is, on paper, this is a closeted person who is just panicking. Spur of the moment, Harper invites her girlfriend, supposedly like spurned on by like Christmas magic, I guess, or like the glow of the romantic situation in the beginning of the film. She wants to spend the holidays with her girlfriend because they're very, very, very in love. And then she wakes up the next morning and is like, oh no. And then she spends all of the movie just not being able to tell the truth. And that's her whole arc. She can't tell the truth. She isn't able to like face the reality of the situation. Where the film is really limited is it does not give us an entry point to empathize with this closeted character. Now, when I say stuff like this, that is not to say that I think that this relationship is healthy, that I think they should have ended up together, that I endorse Harper's behavior in this film. But the lack of empathy we are given towards this character kind of retreads tropes about closeted people that have sprinkled their way throughout queer media for a really long time. And it's that the fact that someone isn't out before they're ready is inherently dangerous to other queer people. What we don't have is an interrogation or like a breakdown of the closet as an entity. All of our anger and hatred is aimed at closeted people, right? They become symbolic for the oppression either previously experienced or currently experienced by queer people now. In the film, Harper is not like a character. She is simply symbolic of the forces being acted on gay people to, you know, like limit their freedom and their expression. I'm gonna go back to the beginning, right? Because I said that when I watched this for the first time, when it came out, that I started crying when I watched it and I just like couldn't stop. Now, the scene that I started crying in was the outing scene, because it was at that moment that I realized that Harper as a character had been set up for us to hate her, so that when she was outed, we were meant to view that as justice, right? She has been the villain of this film, and finally she's gotten her comeuppance. And that just made me absolutely distraught, because this film like leverages the consent of this character to share her identity before she's ready, right? It's a bad idea to invite your girlfriend when you're not out to Christmas. There is no nuance here, and I think in a better film we might have understood why when Harper steps into her house, she immediately reverts back into a version of herself that her parents approve of. In How I Met Your Mother, they call it like revert-a-go.
I'm sitting next to Simon, and suddenly I'm 16 again.
Oh, it's actually a common thing. When you're around someone from your past, you kind of revert back to who you were when you knew them. There's not really a name for it, though.
It's called revert-a-go.
I think what affected me so much about this outing is that I came to understand that a lot of queer people, seemingly, you know, it's not necessarily true, it's just kind of what I felt at the time. A lot of queer people hold a lot of resentment for people still in the closet, or people who aren't able to be out and themselves. Writing a film where your closeted character is more of a villain than the actively homophobic family around her is telling. And this is a constructed scenario, you know, people wrote this. It didn't just pop into thin air. So when people talk about stuff like Harper was abusive, so obviously she's the villain. Okay, but she was written like that for a specific reason. This whole story was constructed for this reason. And because we aren't really given that same, I guess, like nuance of flaws to Abby's character, this isn't a film where you pick a side and be like, ooh, they both have interesting points. No, we are made to hate Harper and side with Abby. When portraying an abusive relationship, you go out of your way to empathize with the person on the receiving end of it. And I wouldn't question that, but I think the lack of humanity here is an issue when you're dealing with the subject of being in the closet. Like, you've drawn a parallel between being closeted and being abusive, and whether you intentionally meant to do that isn't actually the point, because that's what's being done with the story here. So it's not that the closet has turned Harper into a shitty girlfriend, right? It's that Harper was always shitty, and now we're just realizing it. Now we've been made aware. I read a few reviews that kind of echoed this point, but I'm just going to read one from the publication Them. So this is what it says. Harper experiences a terrible and very queer trauma, a deliberately harmful, extremely public outing. But on first watch, I felt a cognitive dissonance between the empathy I felt as someone who once went through something similar and the complete lack of sympathy I had for Harper. After watching her force Abby back into the closet, blow her off for her old straight friends, and generally refuse to acknowledge all the harm she was doing, I didn't want to see her happy. It took a second watch for me to arrive to a deeper understanding of her crisis in the context of her father's and her community's politics. This film vindicates the conclusion we come to not sympathise with Harper or feel sorry for her when she's outed because of her poor treatment of Abby. This is a constructed narrative. This is not a real life situation. These are fictional characters. So I don't feel guilt when saying this. I do think the story would have benefited so much and would have made me just like far less upset had it even tried to understand where Harper was coming from. Wouldn't it have been a more interesting story? Wouldn't we have like understood this point of view? Instead, we're kind of stuck with this very simple narrative of only one of these characters is meaningfully affected by being in the closet, and it's Abby in this situation. We empathize with Abby, even though Harper is also ending up back in the closet. Once again, it is the characters that bear the brunt of this and not the actual fucking closet. What hate have the family got in this situation? Not once did I read a review of people digging into this family because they don't matter, do they? We hate Harper because we're primed to hate her, and that just made me incredibly fucking sad. The fact that after being publicly traumatically outed by her sister, she's like looked down upon because she denies it. Like, she's very clearly in a state of panic and is like, no, I'm not, because this is the routine that she's been primed to do. The whole film, she's been primed to be the perfect daughter. So when she falls back into it as a response to this incredibly traumatic event, we are meant to look down on her for not being like, yes, of course I'm gay and I'm proud of it and this is my girlfriend and we're all gonna be happy, happy, happy. No, instead she's like, no, I'm not, because of course she is. That's consistent with her character. The only thing that is inconsistent is the fact that they end up together at the end. This film has brought out so many emotions in me and is truly one of the most upsetting Christmas movies I've ever seen. So I rewatched it for this podcast, but I'm absolutely positive I'm never watching this film again. I don't think I could take it. Does it look like a badger? Yes, obviously. Oh my god. This film was very much written with the queer experience in mind. I'm not denying that. This is written from the point of view of a lesbian trying to enjoy this Christmas and being thwarted at every turn. The closet is very much a focus, but there was never any plan to interrogate the idea of family and what actions need to be taken in order to assimilate. I think that there is a lot of display of the ways that queer people fail to assimilate. I think there's very little empathy for what energy goes into actually doing it. I'm talking about Harper in this case. This film had no desire to humanize her, which makes for a frustrating and frankly more flat experience when you're trying to represent a toxic relationship and get us invested in it. When your lead character has more chemistry with a side character, Riley in this case, that is an issue. Because you haven't fleshed out this relationship. You haven't invited us to be invested in the nuances of it. It ends up being another film in a long line of queer movies that blames closeted people for the behaviour they exhibit when backed into a corner. And I found that just really upsetting. It presented a toxic relationship and then just refused to end it. And that was incredibly annoying and upsetting for a lot of people. I'm going to give you some recommendations and then I'm going to get out of here because I'm exhausted and my throat hurts. I'm quite ill at the moment, so talking for this long hasn't helped. So my recommendations, let's do those. The first film I'm going to recommend is a French film called Two of Us. It follows Nina and Madeline, who have been sharing their lives with each other for more than 20 years, but they've been doing it in the shadows. So they've been in the closet to both their families. Madeline makes a promise that she's going to come out to her family about the relationship, but then suddenly she has a stroke and is left in the hands of a homophobic family, whilst Nina, she lives in the apartment across the way, has to kind of watch in horror from a distance as she's unable to get to her wife, as she's like in this like stasis. She ends up trying with all her might to look after this woman whilst also not outing her while she's in this state. It's equally stress-inducing, but also seeks to understand the experience of people in the closet and kind of, it's not a Christmas film and it doesn't pretend to be happy for a lot of it, but it is very good and I did enjoy it. The next film, this is going to seem like completely out of pocket, but we're going there. I'm going to recommend the 2015 Krampus film because it's also about a family coming together and then just being like trapped with their toxic ways. So it's about a dysfunctional family that gathers for Christmas, and when an argument causes an explosive reaction at Christmas dinner, a young boy decides he no longer wants to celebrate the holiday, which awakens a mythical creature who wants to seek revenge. It's a horror film, like I said, really different from this film, but it is Christmas and it's about a horrible family being punished for their actions, so that's fun. Thank you very much for listening. I'm going to be back in the new year for season 3. There are going to be some slight changes to the schedule. I will provide an update in January. If you'd like to stay updated, please make sure to follow me on Twitter at LikeABadgerPod. Follow me on Spotify and YouTube and TikTok for full episodes and teasers. If you want to read more of my work, you can find my writing at ambercomwork.com. If you'd like to make a donation, you can go to my kofi, which I'll put in the description. Everything I've referenced is also in the description. Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you in January. Bye.